Welcome to Talent Takeover
Unfiltered.
When it comes to working hard and keeping it real, we know our shit. Self-care, happiness, inner peace, and time. I'm Brianna Rooney, and this is Taylor Bradley.
Hey, y'all.
And we have thrived in chaos and turned it into an art form. So Taylor, what are we doing here today?
We're here to give you a raw, under-the-hood view of all things recruiting and finally give credit where credit is due to a long underrated industry that's full of quote-unquote experts.
All right. Well, then let's take this show to the road. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Talent Takeover Unfiltered. Sorry, I felt like I blacked out. So Taylor Bradley, welcome. Here comes another controversial episode, which I love. But that's why we do what we do. How are you doing?
Good. How are you today?
Fantastical. So the question is, who is responsible for a bad hire?
You are.
Damn it. I knew you'd say
Just you. Doesn't matter what company, doesn't matter where. It's just, no. Yeah, I think this is interesting because I've seen this come up lately on LinkedIn. There's been some discussions about it. And I was just like, this is really interesting because it differs depending upon the company, right? As far as what their approach is. But who do you think's responsible for a bad hire? No, you have first of all thoughts on it.
Yeah, I do. I think everyone, first and foremost, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it from a contingency lens. Okay. I know I got to get all propped up in my chair here. By the way, you can watch this on Millionaire Recruiter YouTube. I definitely suggest you do that. Some good nuggets here. But contingency. So I guarantee a candidate for a certain period of time, right? Mm-hmm. And I try to get 30-day guarantee, and I'll go as high as 90-day guarantee prorated refund. Okay. Because I do definitely, anyone listening does contingency, never give them a replacement for free. You're literally give them two people for the price of one. So don't do that. So I do a prorated refund. Now, my thought process is though, I think there should be zero guarantee because I am not in charge of retention. I am not in charge of the onboarding plan. I am not in charge of how internally they treat people. I am also not in charge of building out their interview process. Mm-hmm. So from a contingency standpoint, I feel like I am zero responsible. Internally, I think we could fight that internally as far as how responsible as a recruiter. But I also think the recruiter is only as responsible as you've let them build. So like if a company says to the recruiter, hey, you are fully in charge from start to finish of our entire interview process, work with the hiring manager. I think, yeah, you probably have some skin in that game, right?
Yeah.
Sure. But there's so many different things that you can put into place. And it's like, look, every single person that interviewed them is responsible.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if we're being realistic, I think more of the blame does tend to get put on the recruiter. And I'm speaking more from like an internal recruiter perspective. You have the agency lens. I'll speak more from the in-house lens. But I think because it's like you're supposed to know the organization, you're supposed to know the culture, and you spend more time with the candidate than anybody else does. In theory, right? Sure. You're supposed to be able, and I've heard it be said before, like isn't that your entire job in recruiting is to know if somebody's going to be a good fit for our organization or not?
Sure.
And I'm like, that's interesting because that was somebody, and of course that was a non-TA person's view. And that wasn't said to me directly, but it was said to somebody I know. And I'm like, that's interesting because that's how they view a recruiter's job. Like if you're the CFO and, the books are a mess and the finances are a mess, like, it's like, well, that's not going to be, Susie over an operations responsibility or a fault, for a bad hire. Like it was kind of like, that's your job is to make sure we don't have bad hires. And I probably would have agreed to that more, to a certain extent, had I not just seen some things recently where I'm like, no, it's absolutely not. It's not the a bad hire too. Like, let's really define what the fuck that is.
Right. That's what I was gonna ask you, because I was saying culture and communication wise, yes, the recruiter shouldn't let certain people through. We definitely have to be those gatekeepers sometimes.
Absolutely.
But I also obviously do engineering. It's like, I'm not going to tell you whether or not a software engineer actually did what they said on the resume. Like that's for you to decide, for you to do. I can ask tons of questions, but I'm not giving them a code challenge.
Well, and here's the other big thing that, like, I am not responsible for their job happiness and role satisfaction once they get in the role. I have no idea what kind of hiring manager XYZ is as far as a actual day-to-day manager. I work with them in a different capacity. I think It's like our job ends once we get the person hired. That's our responsibility as the recruiters. Now, that's why I get a little bit turned off because I'm like, there's not like, how can you say bad hire if they got to the point of being hired? Now, we could be responsible for bad candidates. I think that's more ownership that you could put on us as bad candidates, but a bad hire wasn't made in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of
100%
involved. There's usually tests involved, assessments involved. There's usually a lot of different steps where it's like somebody got through all of these different steps to get hired into whatever the organization is. You cannot possibly put the blame on just one person for that being a bad hire. I think that actually sounds ridiculous.
Yes. Okay. So I was talking to a company last night, hiring manager and founder. Okay. So they're very much like a very small company.
Mhm.
And they were like, I was like, hey, so what's going wrong? Why have we not had a hire yet? We've had some close stuff. They're like, well, when we ask them to solve a problem, they either oversolve it or undersolve it. I go, okay, what else? So I'm like trying to like dig, right? Because I want to know how I can affect the outcome as much as possible. And at the end of the day, I full blown said, I said, is there any questions I can ask them to help fix that problem? Because it seems like that's a situational issue that I'm not going to be able to even screen on.
Mm-hmm.
And they really, 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 really thought about it. And they're like, no, you can't. I was like, okay, so what things can we put into place that we could maybe get as close to that and not constantly waste your guys' time?
Yeah.
Because that like that's what sucks. I think the recruiter is in place to one, hunt, which is the biggie, right? To hunt, and then also to screen culture wise and ask as many questions as we can. So when they get to the hiring manager knows that I had their back. I thought about the company. I thought about whether or not this person could get hired, because here's the thing though. There are recruiters who push as many people through the process as possible in hopes that something's going to stick. So it all depends on what kind of recruiter you are. So for you listeners, if you're the one who's going for volume, like you're going to definitely get thrown into, you're the reason for a bad hire. But if you're actually going through listening to the company's culture, missions, values, you're listening to their communication style, you're listening to what the hiring manager wants, and you're screening effectively, then that's it. It's like you're passing the baton. You're in some kind of race,
Yeah.
Here, now it's your turn. I did my job. Now you have to do yours.
Yeah. And I think that's where it's really important for recruiters to make recommendations with regards to the interview process. If you don't feel like the interview process is set up for success as far as getting a successful hire, if the company's rushing through it and they're skipping a bunch of steps, or, they don't have any kind of assessments in place, they don't have, and which I am a huge believer in, especially these days, because I think they're really powerful and a good indication of how well somebody can fit into the culture. Because at some of the assessments I've seen, like the DISC assessment, and I've even taken that recently, and I'm like, I felt like somebody was following me around or like in the closet or something. It was super accurate. It was really, really accurate. So it's like, but that's not just a box you're trying to check in your process. You need to actually like look at those results. If you have those kinds of assessments in place, look at those results and see, like, is this person truly going to fit? Don't do it to just check a box. Don't try to expedite through the interview process and bypass a bunch of different interviews. And what I mean by that is like, hiring in a vacuum, where it's like maybe one or two people interviewed them and that's it. Like the recruiter and one other, the hiring manager. You need to have diversity of thought and opinion, and having other people involved in panel interviews that are not necessarily even in that department. Like, I think it's really, really good idea to have multiple people talk to that person and everybody be bought in, up to 5 people being bought in on one hire is more powerful than one recruiter being like, I absolutely love this. Like, yeah, you are going to get the blame in that case. But when all these other people interviewed them too, it's like, okay, well, and how can you really even say it's a bad hire too? Like the bad hire thing, I'm just kind of like, what does that even mean?
Yes, I was just about to ask you, let's really define that. Like, what does that mean to you, or what has that meant? Like when a hiring manager's like, I can't believe you, like, this hire's awful. Like, we got to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I don't agree. I want to put this disclaimer out there. I don't agree with it, but what's been told to me as a bad hire are things that are absolutely outside of the recruiter's control about, say it's a finance role and it's like their understanding of global tax structures. I mean, I don't know. I know surface level what somebody tells me about that, but I'm not an expert on global tax structures. You know what I mean? I think that there's things like, and I think maybe having realistic expectations for somebody too. That's what I've often seen is like, they being whoever it is, the hiring manager, leadership team, whoever it is, don't have realistic expectations for the individual. And so they just assume it's a bad hire, but it's like, well, maybe you didn't communicate effectively, or maybe that wasn't clear in the interview, or maybe the questions that we ask them are like surface level questions, and somebody else actually needed to dig in there more to understand, if you wanted them to be, and this is all hypothetical, y'all, but like have, inner knowledge of global tax laws and XYZ countries and list off those 6. And you have to get really specific if you want really specific information. I think you just said it earlier when you said that you asked the hiring manager, what are some questions that I can ask them? I think oftentimes hiring managers don't put a lot of thought into that. Like they don't really put a lot of thought into the hiring process in general with regards, like that's not their job. And I understand that, how they could feel like that, right? That's not my job. That's the recruiter's job. But it's like, how do you ensure that we do our job successfully? Because we're not in finance or accounting or engineering. We only know so much. And so you have to kind of tell us, here's the questions I'd like you to ask. Here's some of the answers that I'd be looking for. Like, here's an indication of a good answer. But I think oftentimes hiring managers don't really want to spend the time with the recruiter to have kind of that knowledge transfer or educate them, and then just expect them to know the ins and outs of like an engineering department or accounting department. And it's like, but that's not what we do for a living. We don't know the ins and outs. That's just like you don't know the ins and outs of recruiting. Spend a little time with us and we'll get the best hire together. And then, I don't know, this bad hire thing, I'm like, I just don't think a bad hire, unless it's like a complete personality conflict, is really the only thing I could see as far as you can call it a bad hire. Because it's like, well, I mean, if they said they could do this job, we vetted that we thought they could do this job.
We vetted them.
Yeah. So it's like, is it really a bad hire, or is it just, it didn't work out? It's a misalignment. It doesn't make them necessarily a bad candidate, But the only ones that I would say that I feel like are really just like would be a bad hire would be like if there's an absolute just horrible personality conflict with this hire and manager, or this hire coworker, literally anybody else. Like if they're just an awful person to work with and be around, and that's not something that as a recruiter, we can pick on it up to a certain extent, but there are those people that can fake it till they make it. And you have to remember, like you're only talking to this person a couple times for maybe an hour at most.
Yeah.
Each time they're going to show you the side of them that they want you to see. So
100%. So I'll give you 2 scenarios that like, I'm like, well, that's a bad hire, but I will say, one, it called out so fast, like the issue was so fast that I didn't even get paid for it, and nor did I want to get paid for it. I wanted nothing to do with this. I felt really bad. And the company was so super sweet to me. And they're like, oh my God, we did not see this coming. This is not your fault, which, makes you feel good. But the candidate got hired really fast. They fell in love. It was like this love story really fast. I was like, whoa, I've never seen like that happen so fast on a higher up position. It was director of engineering. And the person had 2 jobs and was using ChatGPT's extension to connect with Slack. And so he literally was like not working during the day, but the Slack bot was responding to the team like it was him. But obviously, as we know, ChatGPT is very wordy, lots of emojis and stuff if it's not trained properly, right? So it was literally, he was trying to trick the company to get paid and not do any work. And it was just a bot. So it's like, you're just a bad person. Yeah. Like period. Bad person, bad hire. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, that was awful. But no one's going to see that coming. I mean, there's also, I think the scary part is that nowadays there are bots passing interviews for people, And so, like companies have to be aware. So I think recruiters out there, that is something you can help in order to hopefully, sniff out who's going to be a bad hire, is try to put some technology in place to catch, is this a real person? And by the way, if you have to do Zoom interview, like you have to do video interviews, right? Those things have to be done. If people are hiring remotely and not doing that, like that is a total loss. Cameras have to be on. But I will tell you one other scenario where the company did blame me. And it's like a really good friend of mine who's like, who he didn't blame me, but he was like, I'm sorry, the CEO won't work with you anymore. He like totally blames you. But so here's the thing. They vetted this person. It was actually a long process. Another small startup, talked to like 5 or 6 people, did a coding challenge. This was like a pretty long process for a small company. Okay. Gets hired 2 months in. 2 months in it takes. Okay. Or actually almost 3 months because it was past the guarantee. They call and they're like, hey, do you do a background check? And I'm like, no, like that's your guys' thing. Like if you wanted me to do a background check, I can, but as that's not my job. That's an HR thing, right? Mm-hmm. And they're like, we don't think this person's the person that interviewed. I'm like, what? So it took them 3 months, okay? 3 months to decide that the person that's working for them was not the person that interviewed. How crazy is that?
So they didn't do a video. Is this a scenario where they didn't do a video
Yeah.
interview?
Well, they did a video interview in the beginning. So the interviews happened. But once they onboarded the person, they didn't make the person do video. So the person was always off video. And then they realized, wow, this person's not writing code, the quality of code like they were in the interview. So then they dug and they noticed that the VPN was not at the same location that this person was before. So it was a full-blown different person, but it took them 3 months to figure it out.
So who did they ever figure out who was the person that like did the video interview in the beginning?
That was really the person who's the resume, because that's the person who's on LinkedIn. So that was a real person, but they never really figured it out. So, I mean, crazy stuff like that can happen. But again, how is this my fault? And if it took you guys 90 days to figure it out, it's definitely not my fault.
No, I mean, and that's just like, that's one of those scenarios where it's like, you should be ashamed of yourself for even blaming someone else for that. Because common sense, like if it took you 3 months, you didn't make them be on camera, you didn't do a background check. That's where I was going with earlier in the conversation, where I was like, if you need to make recommendations as a recruiter on the process, if the process is too short or if there's not due diligence, like, I mean, I've worked for companies or with companies as clients, both scenarios, that didn't do background checks. And I'm like, how are you not going to do a background check on somebody who's going to be managing your money in a finance role? Like that,
money.
I mean, blows my mind.
Yeah. I love your pen. Let me see your pen.
This is the long hair.
Again, you guys, you got to watch this on Millionaire Recruiter YouTube. Yeah. By the way, take pictures of your own pens. We want to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's kind of crazy. So I will tell you, like earlier on in my career, where everything was on site, there was no remote work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reference checks to me were kind of like, who gives a bad reference? I saw it, maybe every 100 people, right?
Yeah.
Every 100th person, someone has a silly reference check that's like, what were you thinking? But I will say, with remote hiring, really background checks, reference checks, like those are musts. Mm-hmm. And I really think, okay, I'm wondering what your thought process is here. What do you think about making them be from the company that they're working at? Because I know that gets a little hairy.
No, I don't think that's right. Yeah. Because I mean, why would you want to affect I wouldn't let somebody affect my full-time job for a what if I might get this scenario. Yeah. No, I think it's a really fucked up position to even put a candidate in, to have them. Yeah. Like, it has to be from your most recent employer. So I have to risk losing my job, even though I don't have this one yet.
I think that's really difficult. And I'm also thinking of someone like, what if someone's only been at this one company? Like, what are you supposed to do?
I mean, then maybe at every company you should, I'm assuming, have coworkers, peers, people, somebody else that could be a reference for you. But I mean, what I don't love about that is that puts them in an uncomfortable position. That also is like not their direct manager, because you can't ask their manager to do it. Like, imagine if somebody asked you to do a reference check and they were one of your employees and they asked you to serve as a reference for another job that they were interviewing for and thought they were going to they were close to getting an offer for. And this is the first you're hearing of it.
Right. If it's the first I'm hearing of it, you're like, all right. It's like, well, that's your resignation. So thank you very much.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's that's heavy. No, that's so controversial. I could go both ways on it too, because we're also talking about doing due diligence.
Yeah.
So that's crazy.
Do your due diligence in other ways. But I've also, and this is really shitty, and I don't agree with this either, but I've seen this being a topic of discussion on LinkedIn. Tell me if you've seen it as well, but where people are like talking about how it does a candidate a disservice to have only been with one company. It's like, well, can they be adaptable? Are they going to be flexible to change? It's like, I've never heard of it except for these last, 2 years or so, it being a negative thing that somebody has been completely loyal and worked for one company for 10 years, 12 years, whatever it is. And I'm like, and now it does this person a disservice, because it's like, well, how adaptable are they to change? How flexible?
They're stagnant. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I hear it a lot in engineering. Mm-hmm. So, and here's what's even crazier is they want someone to have been at their job for at least 2 years, but no longer than 6. Okay. But so like the fight on that is, what if we show progression? Like they got promoted, they moved to a different department, they're on a different project. They're, like there's so many amazing things for a loyal employee.
Yeah.
But what is interesting though, I will say, is anytime I've placed someone that has been somewhere for, 8-10 years, what I've noticed is they went to a company really fast and then left that company within 6 months.
Really?
It's almost like, it was almost like, wait, shoot, I didn't date enough. So my advice, my advice there is like, look, if you are someone who has been loyal and has had one company for a long time, date a lot afterwards. Don't just jump into something, because I think you're also then going to be mourning and used to where you've been for 10 years, all of your colleagues and the way things were done. And all of a sudden you're like, new processes, you're overwhelmed. Like all of that stuff happened, which again, totally other episode, an interesting episode is how do you adapt to a new company? But I've definitely seen that. And it's like, no, it takes them a couple tries to get it right.
Well, and this goes back to what we were talking about the other episode about re-energizing yourself. Is like, if you've been with the same company and you're like, I need to shake shit up. Like, I need something to feel different. And it's like, you didn't date enough, or you didn't water the grass. Like, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. It's green where you water it. You didn't water it here, to re-energize.
I like
yourself, that. Thank you, Justin Bieber. That's a Justin Bieber song. But it's
didn't even notice.
It is. But it's really, really true. It's like, okay, and that's where I was saying in the other episode, I have a whole new respect for that and a whole new appreciation for, the grass is green where you water it. And just if you feel like you need to shake shit up in your life, which I totally understand, someone's been somewhere 8-10 years. But don't, like, to your point, don't rush into something, when you leave that company, because the grass isn't always greener, and you could fall into something that's absolutely horrible and regret it and wish you would have stayed at your like boring job,
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's, why don't you hit him with a broke to boss tip?
Yeah.
So bad hires.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's everyone's responsibility. So I think my broke to boss tip is like, a bad hire is everyone's responsibility. And I don't think that it should be put on any one person. I really don't. And I think that if the process is bad, it is your job as a recruiter to make recommendations on how to better improve the process and better vet candidates, especially if you've have had any bad hires or hires. This is another scenario that you kind of touched on, but like working 2 jobs. I've seen that be a theme more these last few years. And so it's an employer's responsibility, not the recruiters. It's the employer's responsibility to put checks and balances in place to vet that out, or make it to where that's not possible for somebody to be able to do that. I have seen the recruiters get the blame for that since remote work has become a thing, since COVID, that it's become a thing where it's like, oh, well, they had 2 jobs and you didn't know. And it's like, well, you didn't fucking know either. We never knew. So now,
and
go ahead.
I was going to say, just, I think the overarching thing is like, look, a bad hire is that time of reflection and how are we going to do better and never let this happen again. But to your broke to boss, it's everybody's fault. It's everybody's problem.
It's everybody's fault. It's everybody's problem, and put solutions in place so it doesn't happen again. Like, learn from the first time it happens. When you know better, you do better, whatever that is. Again, it's usually, in my opinion, it's usually because they don't have enough checks and balances in place and they're rushing through a process that they make it bad. If you get desperate, there's this gap in the workforce and, you've got other people covering and you just rush to make a hire and you don't really follow the process like you truly would, or put the time and thought into it that you truly would. It's a fire drill. So, you have to understand that bad hires could come with fire drills as well.
Yep, absolutely. Love that. So for all your recruiters out there who have been blamed for a bad hire, we want to hear about it. Comment, ask questions. We're there for that. Battle stories for life.
Yeah.
See you next Tuesday.
Thanks, y'all.